Okay, well, it sounds like we've got some people from around the country here online, and we're welcome everyone here today. We're broadcasting from the BYU, or Brigham Young University Family History Library in Provo, Utah. And I kind of mentioned one thing about the library. You may have heard this. If not, I think it's important to understand. We have gone over the pandemic, the last year and a half, we have gone pretty much online. And although we are back in the library in person, so you could come to BYU and actually see a live person. But what we are doing is we're maintaining our online presence. And on our BYU Family History Library website, we have a virtual help desk. And there's a link right there on that. It's you can look it up. It's easiest way to look it up is BYU Family History Library, and it comes right up out of Google. And then click in the upper right-hand corner, it says virtual help desk, and you can get straight into a Zoom meeting that is ongoing during the whole time. We're there every week. And that's currently from 10 in the morning until 9 o'clock at night, Monday through Thursday, and then 10 to 6 on Friday. Until we get a few more missionaries, we'll probably not be on Saturday, and Sunday may be either in person or continue virtually like it is now, depending on some of the overall pandemic circumstances, I think, and maybe some other factors. But what we're going to talk about today is a subject that's pretty dear to my heart, and that is books. One thing that I found over the years is that genealogists, as a rule, have moved so much online that they have a tendency to forget that books exist. We work in the BYU Family History Library, and it is a rare occurrence when someone will find their way to the stack of books, of the thousands of books that we have about genealogical subjects in the library. I think there's kind of a tendency for people today to think in terms of so much being online and so much being up to date. And they look at for instance, if I was looking at a book on learning a computer program, the first thing I would do would be to pull it out and look at the copyright information or the publication information. And if it were published 5 or 6 or 10 years ago, I'd go, oh, this book's way out of date. There's no reason to even think about it. But interesting thing about genealogy is history. History doesn't go out of date. It is out of date. It's always out of date. It's just basically the past. And so you get a book that goes back into time. And let's say, for instance, that someone did a family surname book. I'll explain that in a minute. But a family surname book, and they published it in the 1880. Well, technically what you could have in that 1880 book is someone who was alive and was born in 1700. And they would have firsthand knowledge of what happened back in 1700. They would know who their parents were probably. And that would put them back into the 1600s. And that would be almost firsthand information. At that point, it would be firsthand information as far as the living person was concerned, but it would be very accurate information as far as the parents were concerned. And so you can see that you can jump way back in history sometimes in these books with information that is inherently reliable, not information. You've got to be careful and watch what's been sourced and where you actually know where the information came from, because some of these books are not very reliable. But we'll get into that a little bit as I go on here. Okay, so a compiled source. This is a category of records that can be used for genealogical research. And it's a collection of secondary genealogical information copied from primary sources. But on some cases, it can be primary source information, but it may be copied in any event, unless the person who wrote the book is writing an autobiography. And then you may have firsthand knowledge about an event. But most compiled sources are collections of other records. that have either been transcribed or in some cases reproduced in the books. And it's very important to look carefully at what's there. Another type of attitude that I find about genealogists is to discount what you would call a family compiled book, a book that someone wrote about their family. Granted, a person who writes a book like that may have a tendency to alter the facts a little bit more in favorable of the family and of the individuals than otherwise. But on the other hand, as far as genealogy is concerned, we're not really concerned about the character of the people involved so much as the information about who, what, and where they lived. So compiled books, compiled genealogies can be valuable as a starting point for getting further research information. And a compiled source can be a book, a video, a website, a periodical, or it can be in any other media. There's no limiting it just to books on the shelf, but it is any kind of material. If you think in terms of a more expansive way of looking at this, all of the genealogical websites online are, in a sense, compiled sources. But we're going to talk more specifically about where we go to find more specific information about these types of reference and research materials. Important thing to start out with is to always carefully cite your source and tell where the source can be accessed. Okay, so how is a citation in genealogy, how should it be different than a citation for, some of you may be familiar with the modern languages, SocMLA or APA or the Chicago Manual of Style, or any number of these books that are used by academics to create citations. What's the difference here? The difference here is that a citation that identifies the source is not what we're looking at for genealogical purposes. What we're looking at is that the source can be accessed, meaning where do we find the source? So it's great if you tell me, if you give me a book and you give me a citation to the author and publisher, then I can go search and see if I can find the same book again. But perhaps that information is correct. But what we're trying to say is many of the sources that we cite in genealogy are not that easy. It's not that I'm going to be able to go to my local library and find the book, or that I'm going to be able to find it in some other convenient place, even online. What I'm talking about here is always putting in where the information was found. Where did you get it? Kind of answer that question. So if I cite a book, for example, I should be able to tell where that book is located. If it's online, digitized, then I should have the URL or the address to where I can find that book. If it's found in a library, if I walked into the University of Utah Library, for example, here in Utah, and found a book in the Marriott Library and said, this is really helpful material. Yes, I could copy down the title and the publication and all that, do a standard citation, but I would also say accessed it at the Marriott Library at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City, Utah. So that would tell me where I could get the book. And this is really important. The more, I guess you would call it, obscure the records and materials that we find are that we use, because telling us that you found a marvelous book about this life history of this ancestor is wonderful, but it may be the only copy of the book, and we have no idea where in the world we would find that one copy of that one book. So that's just an important point to start out with when we're talking about this kind of material, the compiled source. So I've mentioned that there's a lot of genealogists who, I guess, look a bit askance at at compiled sources, and why are they unreliable? Well, there's a very interesting problem here. First of all, most of the people who have done genealogy for the last couple of hundred years have had to rely directly on paper. In other words, it's only been the last 20 or 30 years that any kind of quantity of information has been available directly online. So what we do in many of these instances is we have information that was taken from books, and we're never sure how reliable the information is. It's very frequent. There's no information that we call a citation to the record. It doesn't tell us where that information came from. It's just copied into a book. So these long genealogy, what we call books, surname books. Now, a surname book would take a particular name, a surname, and do all the people going back on that surname from an individual or descending from an individual in the past, usually for some reason a prominent ancestor, the original immigrant, or someone who settled a particular community at a particular time. Or in my family, for example, the person who joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, that's the person that's remembered, and all the books, not all, but a very number of surname books have been published about this particular individual. The unfortunate thing about that is, for genealogical purposes, is sometimes the information about the predecessors of that famous person or that outstanding person are sadly lacking. That there just isn't much past the person who is the featured person in the book. So the question is, why are they unreliable? The answer, I think, should be to that answer is that they are not. They're not inherently unreliable, any more inherently unreliable than any other resource, any other record. There can be mistakes, there can be mistranscriptions, there can be omissions, there can be duplication, there can be lots of different things happen. But they are records, and they should be considered to be valuable genealogical records, insofar as they may, at least for practical purposes, give you an idea of what kind of information would be helpful and where it might be located. So it just, I have seen some of these descendancy surname books where every last date and every last place was extensively cited as to the source. Every single source was listed for every event that was humanly possible. I have seen other extensive surname books where there wasn't even one citation to a source. It didn't say anywhere where the information came from, except for the author. So that there's two kind of extremes there. So we don't really want to kind of throw out all of the books, all of these other records out there, just because they may inherently, or they could be, inaccurate. And we have the same problem with all records. So we should just simply arrange our thought process so that we understand that all of these different records are going to have inherent faults, and we need to work through multiple sources so that we can override the tendency of the records themselves to be unreliable. Okay, so what that means, and I'm going to kind of summarize that, it means that the books are not inherently unreliable. They are simply another record, and they may have some limitations that you need to take into account when you use these materials for genealogical research. So what are we looking for? What is it out there that we need to search for? And one thing that I always used to tell people when I worked at the Mesa Family Search Library in Mesa, Arizona, as they came into the library. We had thousands of books in the library, and I used to say, they come in and say, well, I'm looking for information about my great-great-grandfather. Well, if they were in Mesa and they were in Mesa Family Search Library, there was a fairly high percentage of time that when they said their surname, that I would recognize the surname, and I would say, well, do you know that there's probably a surname book about your ancestor? And they'd say, well, what's a surname book? I'd say, well, let's see if there's a book here in the library about your ancestor. And we'd walk to the collection of books, and I would go, they were in alphabetical order, so it was fairly easy to find the book. So we would go and find the book. So this is not unusual. And it's certainly not unusual today when we begin to see how many books there are out there that are readily available online. I've given one example here in the slide of a surname book of my ancestors, George Jarvis and Joseph George DeFries. And this is a genealogical book that was written by my great-grandmother. Over the years, there's been a lot of criticism about the book, but my subsequent research has shown that the information in the book is generally reliable. Some of the stories, as I mentioned, have a tendency to whitewash some of the worst features of some of the people that were involved. But other than that, the basic information is a tremendous leg up for trying to get started in riding this particular horse into the sunset. We just really, it would be terrible if you had to go back and reconstruct all the thousands of names that my great-grandmother put in this particular book. So currently, FamilySearch.org has about 490,000 digitized books, genealogy books online, totally for free. Now, some of these books are restricted because of copyright. You can't necessarily download a copy, but they can be, and some can be viewed, and some of them can't even be viewed unless you're inside the family history library, and others may even have restrictions. But in every case, when you find a book in this, the ones that are viewable and searchable word for word all the way through the book. So there's a very simple way to look for a particular ancestor in the book and to see if they're there. I would also point out that the usefulness of these kinds of books becomes greater to the extent that you have done the research and have basically worked on your family tree for some time, because when you are acquainted with the people, then it's easier to spot, and you have more search terms that you can use to search for the books that might be pertinent to your particular interests in what you're trying to research in your family. Okay, so where do you get this? It's on FamilySearch.org. It's under the search menu. And when you click on this at the top, you touch on search, then one of those is books. You put in the name of the book or the author or anything to do with the book, and then it will find everything that has that term. So you could technically go in here and put in your great-great-grandfather's name or grandmother's name and find that in a book someplace. And that would give you a lot of information. The question, I always point this out to people as I'm talking about the Family Search website, but it's amazing how few people have ever used this and are aware of the tremendous amount of information that's being developed. This is not the end, by the way. This is not a closed collection. As we, even during the pandemics and forward in time, the Family Search continues to digitize books as they become available, and this collection will continue to grow. So I've seen it grow from when it began with a few thousand books up to this huge collection of 494,000 books. The other tremendously large outlet, internet website that has probably correct today way more than the total number of books in any other physical library in the world. So there's probably more books now in the Internet Archive that are completely searchable, word for word, completely digitized. And in this case, every one of the books that there could be copied or downloaded. It's just an amazing collection of books from all over the world. And it's a resource that is often unknown to or ignored by genealogists. I would put it right up there with Family Search and Ancestry and all the big log websites as being the most valuable website that is not specifically developed for genealogy. So the question is, why are there so many genealogy books? The answer is because why there are lots of books, and they simply pull in everything. In addition to that, the Internet Archive, or archive.org, has, like it says here, 28 million digitized text, and it also has videos, recordings, audio recordings, computer programs, an Internet Archive, and all other kinds of media material on there. Just billions and billions of pages of information. One of the most valuable ways to look for a book or information, and if you find that it's not available someplace else, always go to the Internet Archive 100% of the time, put in the name or the author of the book, and then type in Internet Archive or archive.org. And it will do a search through the entire Internet Archive and tell you if there are, if any of that material is available. You may very well be surprised. One of the other categories of things that are extremely helpful to genealogists are local and state histories. And in other countries, the same thing, local, province, district, whatever histories. And the local histories are extremely important, especially if your ancestors lived on a farm in a small town, or they were one of the earlier immigrants or settlers in a particular area. If they were the first into Kansas, or they were the early people into Ohio, or if they were early people into Georgia or someplace like that, there's no question that there will be a local history of that area. And the chances are that your ancestor will at least be mentioned and may even be featured in those histories if they were one of the earliest settlers in an area or a prominent citizen. It's an interesting and very educational exercise for genealogists to get into something like the Internet Archive, archive.org, and start looking for the local histories for the places where those people came from. So if I were to look out here and I see somebody from Louisville, Texas, and I would look for a county history or a local history of Louisville, Texas, or Kalamazoo, Michigan, and or the place where your ancestors are from. Now, the Hothi Trust has a strange name. It is basically a consortium of university libraries across the United States, and online and searchable. If you are associated with or affiliated with a university as a student or staff or professor or whatever, you may have access to all of the materials on the Hothi Trust digital library. If you don't happen to be affiliated with a school, you won't get the full copies of the books. You won't get a full view of the book. You would only get a citation, or in some cases, an excerpt of some information in the book. That's because of copyright. But on this and kind of emphasize when we talked about the when I talked about the Internet Archive a moment ago, those are uncopied, those are books that are readily searchable and online and readily downloadable. This one is a little bit more limited, but they have 17 million digital books and 6 million of them are in the public domain. So about 6 million more books that may be, and the thing about the Hothi Trust is that all of these books exist in the physical sense in a library, in a university in the United States. So another accessible way to get to this information is through what's called interlibrary loan. If you go to your local public library, you might want to call in advance, or look on their website. But it's very likely that they have a subscription to an interlibrary loan service. And they, with an interlibrary loan, you simply go in, fill out. Sometimes there's a charge, a nominal charge, could be $5, $10, $15 or whatever, but it's a charge. And they will then request a book from any library that participates in interlibrary loan, which covers the whole United States for sure. And within a few days or a week or so, they might be contacting you to come and look at your library. The limitations on interlibrary loan are going to be that they may require you to look at the material in the library. Under some circumstances, the material may or may not be copyable. If it's copyrighted, you may be able to write notes on it or whatever, but not copy the entire book. But I have heard just recently, as a matter of fact, one of the missionaries at the Family History Library in BYU was telling me about the fact that he'd, after many, many years, had searched down a limited publication family history book that was basically a surname book, but it was the only one in existence, had a very, very limited publication. And he was never able to get a copy of the book until he found it on interlibrary loan and got the book, and then asked permission of the library to make a complete copy, and they let him make a complete copy because it was a surname book and did not really have any particular interest in not being copied. So that's the kind of the idea of fitting about the books. Now, as we go through this, I'm going to be talking about different websites in a sense, and I'm going to be talking about the access that you can have to the physical library from the internet to getting into to physical libraries. The emphasis here is on very large collections that are tremendously large collections of information that are relatively not used or not known by genealogists, that they're not like on everybody's list. But my experience has been that they should be on everybody's list, and they should be used very, very frequently in your checklist of places to go. And all of these are going to be free. They're not going to be charging you anything to get on these libraries and look for them. If they are, I'm going to tell you that there's a subscription or some kind of access fee. But in this case, these first ones, from Family Search to the Internet Archive to the Hothi Trust to this one now, which is the Digital Public Library of America, are free. They're freely accessible. All the information and everything on them is free to the public, with the exception of anything that's covered by some copyright. Okay, so here we have, and maybe you have never realized that we have a Digital Public Library of America, which is a free access public library to immense, very quickly growing collection of tremendous amount of information. And these people actually have, the Digital Public Library of America actually has a specific section for genealogical information. and for records that have been digitized and made part of this. The number you see on this slide is 41,800,000 plus images, text, videos, and sounds. This is something that's been growing. This is one of the newest entries in the large online digital collections. And this is one that has not been derelict in collecting genealogical information and making it specifically available. So here you have another few million images, and they also notify you one or the other if there is some copyright issue about the information of the documents that they're talking about. Just for an example, on here on the Digital Public Library of America, there's also the Western Digital America Library, which has specific history and genealogical resources for the western part of the United States. And so you need to get on here because there's state collections that are coming on to this website all the time of digital collections that are being added to the Digital Public Library of America. The United States is way, way behind some of the other countries of the world who have been making their library and museum offerings available for almost since the beginning of the internet. Now, we're getting to another huge collection. Unfortunately, we have no real numbers of how many books have been collected by Google. It's kind of a long history. Google started the idea of digitizing all the books in the world and making them available, and quickly ran like into a brick wall with copyright restrictions. They were sued. They had a long lawsuit. The short story of the long lawsuit is that the people who sued them were publishers and authors, and claiming that their collection per se was violating copyright law. Eventually went all the way up through our US court system, and there was a ruling in favor of Google. So Google won that election. But since that time, Google's been pretty careful not to ever divulge anything concerning how many or how much of the information they have online. But there are millions of digital books, and they're basically in three different categories. You can look at the entire book. That comes up as a read book. And then there's one that's partially viewable, and that comes up as a preview, like on this one. And then there's books that only are available as a list, either because they're so rare that nobody really has a copy of the book, or they are copyrighted so recently that the information, for whatever reason, isn't available. So you can go on here and do a look, and if they're a read book, then you can get a full digital searchable copy of the book and download it for your, if you wish. You know, it's obviously, if you're collecting books digitally, you don't have quite the space limitations that you have if you get hardbound and paper books. But on the other hand, there's really no incentive to do it, because if the book is online and it's available, there's no reason for you to copy down a copy to your computer, because you can always use it from someone else's computer. Now, if it's a really rare book, you may want a copy of it on your computer, your own record, simply because that makes it more convenient, and it may not always be online. There's always the possibility. Okay, so this is what I said earlier, that old surname books may contain information obtained directly from your ancestors during their lives. So it's just important to understand this. And some of the stories and some of the information and the details about the people may be more current at the time that they were written and maybe not be able to be found anywhere else. I had an interesting experience lately. I have been writing a journal for many years. And unfortunately, I did not start it until I was well into my adult ages. But now that I'm getting into the older time of my life, it's now been many years since I've been writing in the journal. But I decided not too long ago to try to write down all of my impressions and remembrances from the time I was born, and then try to connect it up with the beginning part of my consistent journal writing. And in the process of doing that, I was reminded that I had written a summary of my life, a biography of my life, an autobiography, many years ago. This one happened to be in 1973, and it's been that many years. Well, I ran into it after I had been thinking and writing about some of my early memories. And when I read what I had written back in 1973, I discovered that there were many things that I had completely forgotten. I had no idea of the things that I remembered in 73 that I do not remember today. And even though I can read them there in 1973, I still don't have any memory of those particular things happening. So this is in kind of in an immediate example of what happens with these books as they get older. The information in them becomes more valuable because it's less reproducible. There's no one today who remembers the things that are in these books, and if you categorically do not look at books, then you are simply being handicapped from doing adequate and complete genealogical research, because genealogical research involves all sorts of resources, and focusing on one type of resource and saying, well, I don't do online family trees, or I don't do subscription websites, or I don't do whatever. The answer to that is, well, then you don't do genealogy, because genealogy involves all of those things and all of those resources. And to limit yourself from getting the information that's available in those resources is just not practical. However, I always have some kind of, I guess, limitation on any kind of record, and that is make sure that you verify the information with valid sources. If the information in the book is not sourced, then it is not necessarily correct, and you need to check it and see if there's a source. The key with the books is that they give you the starting point. They give you the place where the names and perhaps the dates and the places that you need to start looking for other sources. So when you go out there, either online or in a physical library, go look for the following types of books. First of all, surname books. So they start with or go back to a remote ancestor. So they may have all the people in a line, in a surname line, and they're basically discoverable through searching for your surnames and in those catalogs and the places. I mentioned already local and county histories, and the reason why why I'm repeating this is because there's just things to emphasize. These are history books, and they talk about people, and you need to be aware of the existence of these books. And it may be that some of the biggest mysteries that you have, and the things that you may consider to be your brick wall or your end of line, are merely items that can be resolved very quickly by reading the history and finding out, oh, wait a minute. I've been thinking this was wrong. I thought these people came from North Carolina. They actually moved in from Georgia directly and never were in North Carolina. So I've been looking, and I haven't been looking in Georgia. Okay, so this is the kind of thing you might find in a local and county history. Understanding that your people always lived in the context of the world and the history, just like you do. I mean, you're living within the times that you are there living in, and we are all a part of this historical stream. But our ancestors went through these same kinds of experiences, and any records that were kept were helpful. Okay, now here is kind of the key to all of this information. The key to this information is that there is a compilation of the library's catalogs. Let me just explain this a little bit so that you'll understand. When you do a search online using a search engine such as Google or one of the other search engines, what you are doing is you are looking at a sense the selection of items that Google or the other search engines have made, and that they, and to the depth that they have examined all of the information within those particular websites. So what you're doing with Google when you do a Google search is you're trying to guess what Google found and some keywords that may be associated with something that Google found on a website someplace out there in the internet, in the world. So if it's your ancestor's name, or if it's something other information that might be helpful, then that's what you're trying to guess when you go on to doing a Google search. Now, what about a catalog search? This is worldcat.org. WorldCat is the catalog of the catalogs, with over 2 billion catalog entries around the world in thousands of libraries. So basically what this particular program has sort of revolutionized the way that libraries catalog their books, and the time involved and the effort that was used to be involved in cataloging a book, because it's very likely that everything in your library is in WorldCat, and everything that is in any other library. When I was working at the University of Utah on my degrees, graduating, I worked in the University of Utah library for a number of years. And my job was called a bibliographer. And my job was to search the library's holdings, the paper catalog, card catalog, and the other resources to verify a book. In other words, we needed to know first if the library already had it, or the university already had the book someplace. And secondly, we needed to know exactly what that book was called and what the title and author were, so that we could order the book if we didn't have it. So I was the guy who had the job, or one of the people in the bibliography department that had the job of finding out if the books existed and then correcting the order, the book order, to reflect the correct name, and finding someplace where it could be purchased. That was sometimes we had to do that also. So basically, what happened is that I discovered over this process of years of working at the library that cataloging was a different activity than indexing or word searches like on Google, word and character searches. So what are we talking about when we're talking about a catalog? We're talking about subjects. So a catalog works from creating categories of subjects and then putting books into those categories of subjects so they can be found. So if you go to your library, your local library, likely you're going to have something that looks like what's called the Dewey Decimal System. And the Dewey Decimal System is a numbering system for numbering different categories of information, of books and records, and of all types. And then you look it up in the catalog and see where it is located physically on a shelf. But if you want to do research and you're not sure of the name or where this thing is, then what it is that you're looking for, then the catalog helps you, because you can put in subjects and then it will give you offerings of books that are in that subject. So in doing a Google search, as I mentioned, you're trying to guess what someone wrote on a website. And as doing a catalog search, you're trying to find out how someone characterized the information that you're looking for. So for example, my ancestor, Henry Martin Tanner, who was a early settler in northern Arizona in a place called Joseph City. Okay, so what I've just said are a lot of different categories of subject matter that you might find information about Henry Martin Tanner. You might find it from early settlement of Arizona under Arizona history, early history, or early settlement. That's a catalog. And that's what you have to do. And basically working with a catalog is something that you learn. It's not something you're born with. I mean, you can think about, you always say that young people can run all the digital equipment, all the electronic equipment, and because they grew up with it, they know what it is and they know how it works. It doesn't help them one whit when you get into a catalog, because they have no experience finding things in a catalog and typing in the name they want, and they're not finding it. They basically conclude that it's not there. And the answer is there is no word for word transcription of all these materials. They're organized by categories. So you have to begin to construct in your head a selection of books that gets you to that. I mean, a selection of categories that get you to that book, those books or records that you're looking for. Now, what does WorldCat do? WorldCat goes way beyond that, because it not only has sort of unlimited categories, it has access to, like I already mentioned, thousands of libraries with billions of entries. And you're able to find just about anything in any library. And one of the advantages of the program is that you can put in your zip code or your local address code, and it will then tell you which libraries have the material you're looking for and how far away they are. So they'll tell you which is the closest library that has the material that you're looking for. You don't really do that. You don't get in your car and drive down the library just because it's there. You might do that if you were me, but you don't have to. Basically, what you'll do is you will then go to that library catalog and see where the book is. And then you will go online on Google to see whether somebody has digitized the book and whether it's available in a digital format before you get in your car and go anyplace. And so that would be the way to find the material once that you were looking there. Beyond books as they're commonly classified, there are publications of all kinds. There's everything from newspapers to magazines and these types of materials, these publications are called, generally by libraries, are called serials, meaning they came out in succession, that there are multiple volumes or multiple copies of each of the types of records. So like a newspaper comes out once a day or once a week or whenever, once a month, or a journal comes out once a quarter or once a year, but they are published successively over years. And so the run of that serial is the time, during the time for which it's been published. And now, what kinds of things are we interested in here? Well, first of all, what we want to understand is that there is a huge collection of genealogical materials that have been captured in serial format. They come from local historical societies, genealogical societies, libraries, museums, all sorts of different archives, all sorts of different places that have published material about the contents or the history or the genealogy of these areas where these periodicals, these magazines or journals or other records have been published. So over the years, a library in Fort Wayne, Indiana called just went out of my head. Anyway, the big library there, it'll come in just a second. is collecting what's called Percy. Percy is the periodical source index. And now it is being incorporated onto the program, onto the online program called Find My Past. So Find My Past is a British program. And you may have said, well, I don't have any English ancestors, so I really don't have to look on that website. But basically, the Allen County Public Library in Allen County, Fort Wayne, Indiana. Basically, the Allen County Library has for many, many years been collecting these periodicals from local and pieces of paper in handwriting, pieces of paper that have been mimeographed, if you don't know what mimeograph is, duplicated in all different ways, self-published, locally published. They have it. And they have indexed the information on those documents, all of those publications. And so what we have here is an index, and it's still growing. They're still acquiring information, but it's on the Find My Past website, which is supposed to be all British, but it happens to have a core here with over 3.1 million searchable entries of all these different periodicals. Sometimes then you have to chase down the periodical, but if you know the name and you know the location, it's very possible you can find a library through WorldCat or through searching in your library catalogs of where that might be, or it may be in a state archive or with a state historical society. Okay, another category of published material out there that is just extremely valuable are city directories. I think the genealogists also have a tendency to forget these exist. And they get to the census records and they say, well, the 1890 census is missing and I really, really need that information. Well, the city directories take the place. They're not as comprehensive in most cases. They don't have all the names of the family members, but they may very well identify your ancestor at a specific address that gives you access to finding records, and not necessarily access, but knowledge of where some records that could have been created that may overcome the difficulty of losing something like the 1890 census or the 1831 census in England. So, you just really have to look carefully and look at these. Now, the paper editions of these show up almost anywhere. You can't in libraries. And the libraries who get them usually hold on to their directories. But there are now some tremendously large collections online. They are particularly helpful for large city research, where the people were renters or new arrivals or temporary residents. They also may be the only source if they were not registered to vote or did not own property. So you may want to go back. And the directories, by the way, go back in time to the 1600s. So there are directories in both what became the United States, America, and other directories in Europe that go clear back into the 1600s. So you may want to start looking for these records. You can also learn the exact years that your ancestor was in a place, because they're usually published serially, meaning consecutively, so that there's a directory for each year, and those collections may be available and allow you to do this. You can also estimate the year of immigration by when they show up in the directory. So that's another way that it shows up. And the occupation of their employer. And you can find other family members. They may be on the same page because they live very close or work very much in proximity. They're also compiled genealogies. Now, these are professionally created usually, or they can be individually created, but a lot of them are created by societies and other organizations. And they are books that are invaluable. This is the Mayflower families through 5 generations. You may not be aware of this, but if all of the passengers on the Mayflower have been extensively researched down through 5 generations of their descendants. And they're all in this series of books from the General Society of the Mayflower Descendants, or the Mayflower Society. There's no question they have spent millions of dollars and probably tens of thousands of hours compiling this, and they are all completely sourced. So this set of books is invaluable if you go back into your New England ancestors, particularly in the ones, if you even suspect that you're a descendant, all you have to do is hook into one of these books and find an ancestor that's in the book, and then it'll take you right back to the Mayflower people. Another couple of things real quick: indexes from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, list of everybody who worked there. Lineage Societies, Continental Society, the Daughters of the Indian Wars. There are more lineage societies than you can even begin to imagine. There's a lot more than the Daughters of the American Revolution and the Sons of the Utah Pioneers and all those kinds of people. This is the one I just mentioned, the General Society of Mayflower Descendants. If you carefully document, and find that you are a descendant of the Mayflower, you can join this society. Look for professional directories. There are an innumerable number of these. This is the Flying Dutchman Ski Club in Reading, Pennsylvania. You may find all sorts of information about an individual from this kind of a list. Don't forget online family trees. They're part of this great compilation of compiled sources. But be careful of entering the dark forest of online family trees. Most of them are copies of copies of copies. And so basically you need to make sure that you look that this wasn't taken from Family Search or from another website, that it actually has some specific sources cited to support the information that's in the family tree. Don't just copy information. Okay, there's my admonition right there. Just keep looking for similar publications. There is absolutely no end to what you will find. There are libraries and online resources that I haven't mentioned that are that have billions of entries. Okay, well, thanks for watching.